Welcome, members. This meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, due to government advice, will be held remotely. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as possible after the meeting. Please could everybody ensure that mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. Officers will present a summary of the key points in respect to the agenda items. The agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers may switch their cameras on when speaking, but I would ask that, with the exception of the chairperson, all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off. If anyone wishes to raise a point or question, they should press the hands up icon on the top right hand side of the screen. You will be called to speak in turn. Please lower your hand when you have finished speaking. Officers from Democratic Services will be supporting the meeting and monitoring the use of microphones. Officers are asked to introduce themselves when invited to speak. Members in attendance today are Councillor Alex Williams, Councillor Altaf Hussain, Councillor Amanda Williams, Councillor Bridie Sedgbeer, Councillor Cheryl Green, Councillor Elaine Venables, Councillor Janice Lewis, Councillor Lynn Walters, Councillor Pam Davis, Councillor Richard Granville, and Joe Williams, the lay member. That's everyone.
Michael, can I just give apologies for Paul Davis? He's going to be running late. He's in work, but he is going to come to the meeting later, but he's giving his apologies now.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Michael. Purposes of recording, I'm Mark Galvin, Senior Democratic Services Officer Committees. We'll go to agenda item 1, the members' election of chairperson. Please could I have a nomination for chairperson of the Governance and Audit Committee for the ensuing year? Please note that this cannot, under legislation, be a member of the majority group of the council, which is Labour. Can I have a nomination, please?
Can I say Lynn Waters?
Could I have a second there? Yes.
I'll second that, Mark.
Thank you.
Mark, I don't know if you can see the hands. Councillor both Williams has had their hand up.
Sorry.
Mark, I just wanted to say that I'm just here observing the meeting, so I'm not a member of this committee.
I'm aware of that, Councillor Williams. Yeah. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
I wanted to nominate Councillor Elaine Venables, please.
Could I have a second for that nomination, please?
Second, please, Mark.
Cheryl, yeah. Any further nominations, please, for chair? No. I will now read out members, and members can vote for either of the two nominated selections for chair, or alternatively you can abstain, members, from the vote. We will now proceed to the vote. Councillor Green, please.
Councillor Venables, please.
Councillor Lewis, please.
Sorry, Mark, I'll be Councillor Lynn Waters.
Councillor Granville, please.
Councillor Walters.
Councillor Walters, please.
Myself, please.
Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Councillor Venables, please.
Councillor Pam Davis, please.
Councillor Lynn Walters, please.
Councillor Altaf Hussain, please.
Councillor Waters, please.
Joe, please.
I would like to abstain if I may, Mark.
Abstain, of course. Councillor Venables, please.
Councillor Venables.
Councillor Sedgbeer, please.
Councillor Walters, please.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, Councillor Lynn Walters, please. Sorry, the baby at the same time decided to make a baby.
Okay, thank you. Right, members, that's 6 votes for Councillor Walters, 3 votes for Councillor Venables and 1 abstention. I therefore declare that Councillor Walters is Chairman of the Governance and Audit Committee for the ensuing year. Councillor Walters, would you please like to take the chair?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody. I'll do my best as chair for the following period. So, moving on to agenda item number 2, please may I have any nominations for the vice chair? Councillor Amanda Williams.
Can I nominate Councillor Venables, please?
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Any other nominations for vice chair?
I'll move Councillor Altaf, please.
Okay. Any seconder for Councillor Altaf Hussain? Altaf, I'm just conscious of your duties in the Senedd, so didn't know whether you wanted to be considered as vice chair for.
I am grateful for the thought, but I will.
Okay, all right then. So, if there aren't any other nominations, I propose. I think that's carried. That Councillor Elaine Venables is the vice chair. So, thank you very much for that, everybody.
Great.
So congratulations, Elaine. And moving on to agenda item number 3, any apologies for absence, please?
Chair, just to say about Councillor Davis will be late to the meeting.
Thank you.
Yep, we've had 2 apologies, Chair. Councillor Mike Kern and Councillor Tom Beadle.
Thank you very much. And so I think everybody else is here. So, Councillor.
Sorry, I've got my hand up.
Hand up.
Yeah, I'm doing it the proper way, putting my hand up as we've been told, not jumping in. Yes, I've got to apologise. I do need to do the school run today for all 3 of my children, so I have to leave then. So I'll be leaving about 5 to 3.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have a declaration of interest for any part of the agenda today, please? Okay, so no declarations of interest. So moving on to agenda item number 5, the approval of minutes. So has everybody had the chance to read the minutes, and are there any amendments that anybody would like to suggest? Mrs. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just double check? Can you hear me speaking?
Yes, we can.
That's okay. I just a little bit looking a bit strange, this the graphics. Yes, I just have one small point really. Page 7. Hope this is right. Page 7, the 4th paragraph says that I explained the integration. I think it is. I haven't got it just in front of me at the moment. Integration of the fraud risks with the corporate risk register. I don't think that's quite accurate. I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have explained. I think it's if it could just be changed to clarify that what I did was perhaps questioned it, or just asked, or something along the lines of. I think I might have said that I would have kind of expected it, but I don't think the word explain is quite right in that context. So if that could be altered, please, just to reflect a little more accuracy, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mark, is that possible for that minute to be changed on that basis, please?
Yes, Chair, we can make the necessary amendment there.
Lovely, thank you. So can I have a mover for acceptance of the minutes, please, and a seconder?
Happy to move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item number 6, the action tracker. Mark, I think you're going to take us through this, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief because we've got quite a heavy agenda. I'm Mark Alvin, Senior Democratic Services Officer Committees. The purpose of this report is to provide members with an update on the Governance and Audit Committee action record. As members know, an action record has been devised to assist committee in tracking the decisions made by members in the exercise of its functions. Paragraph 4, this schedule assists members in ensuring that decisions made by the committee are actioned and implemented. The action record is attached at Appendix A to the report, Chair. Members are therefore asked to note the action record and comment on this as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Taking each of the actions in turn, does anybody have any comments on the action tracker, please? No, the first one I would say is I do believe that the very first action tracker was covered off at the last meeting. So action about the Regional Internal Audit Shared Service Charter. So that I believe can be greyed out now. I know that Audit Wales are going to be doing their reports on the financial sustainability and National Fraud Initiative. And then the others are due for later on in the year. So if I could have a mover for the action record that has been, that we've noted it and happy with the action record, please.
Move.
Councillor Amanda Williams.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the hand before to ask a question. I struggled.
Apologies.
Just bear with me a second while I switch the screen back to the document. Just two things. One slight thing. It says at the top, date for action to be brought to committee. So that should be brought to committee, I'm assuming. And in the last meeting, we discussed again about some of the target dates being missing. And it was just, we've got completed and that, but there are a couple of gaps. But it was nice to see that there were a lot more dates in there now compared to last time.
Thank you, Amanda.
Okay. Thanks.
Sarah Jane Byrne, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm Sarah Jane Byrne from Audit Wales. I'm one of the audit managers. I just wanted to clarify that our financial sustainability report has just been issued in draft to the council, so we won't be discussing it at the meeting today, but hopefully the next meeting. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And Joel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was the same point, actually. It's on the tracker as June. It was due to come in June and hasn't been able to come in June, so that will need amending to come in July, providing it's agreed by then.
Lovely. Thank you. So if that could be updated, Mark, on the tracker, please. And then if everybody's happy with those amendments, if I could have a mover to note the report.
Move.
Thank you,
Second.
Thank you, Amanda. So I know that we have got a very busy agenda today. So moving on to agenda item number 7, which is the Audit Wales reports. So Jill, I don't know whether you want to take us through the introduction or just to hand straight over to Sarah Jane.
I'm happy to hand over, Chair, but just to say that we should have, we've got a guest from Audit Wales that I suspect Sarah Jane will now introduce, but there is a presentation as part of the Audit Wales presentation today. It's something that the Audit Committee have asked for on a number of occasions, which is the NFI presentation. So just to let you know that, I'll hand straight over now.
Thank you. So Sarah Jane, please.
Hi, yes, so I'm just going to, thank you, Chair. Just going to quickly, Jason is going to quickly run through the financial audit aspects, and then I'll pick up the performance audit aspects. Okay. And then, as Jill says, my colleague Dave will run through the presentation for you.
Lovely.
Okay, thanks,
you.
Chair.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Sarah Jane. It's Jason Blewett, Financial Audit Manager for Audit Wales. Apologies, I'll have to leave the camera off. My broadband is not the best, so I'll just go straight into the update paper. So this is the usual update paper that we provide to each committee, sets out progress against the planned work that we've set out for the year. As Sarah Jane mentions, I'll take you through the financial audit bit, then pass over to her to take you through the performance bit. So in terms of the financial audit work, there's not really a lot to update you on from the last audit committee. You may recall that at that committee we mentioned that the 1920 grants programme of work was finalised, and in terms of the accounts we presented the audit plan to that meeting. We've now received the draft accounts, which I know are on the agenda for today's audit committee, and so we're now in the detail of the audit work for financial audit, with the aim to sign off by the end of July. So I think that's all I really wanted to say on financial audit. As you might appreciate, we're in the early stages, so there's not a lot to sort of feedback yet. So I'll now pass over to Sarah Jane.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So I'll just quickly run through the performance audit programme. So there are a couple of things to update you on this. So in terms of our last year's programme, 2021 programme, we've recently issued a letter to the council summarising some of our findings around recovery planning. That touches on a number of different aspects, returning to democratic arrangements, the scrutiny work, use of IT, that kind of thing. So we just issued that letter. I think actually we just issued the final letter, I think, actually, this week to the council on that. I mentioned the financial sustainability, that we've just issued the draft report to the council. So we're in the clearance process around that at the minute. We've also done a piece of work around digital and the council's arrangements becoming a digital council. Again, we've just recently issued the final report on that, I think that literally this week. So there's been some changes around that to what's actually put in the papers. In terms of this year's work, the annual audit summary, some of those we haven't started yet, and the improvement reporting, which is required, will happen later on in the year. The work that we'll be doing around assurance and risk assessment is an ongoing piece of work that we do throughout the whole year. And then there's some key pieces of work, a thematic review, which is being done at all 22 councils. We're currently kind of scoping that. That's not due to take place until the autumn, but once we know a bit more about exactly what that's going to cover, we can give you an update in terms of the scope of that, perhaps at the next meeting. And then there's some other piece of work, a follow-up review of disabled facilities grants. I know you had a report, I think, at the last meeting on that. So we're currently looking at the scope around that. And we're also doing a review, which is about the Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Partnership. That's a piece of work we're doing at the four bodies. We've had initial conversations with the council about that, and we'll be doing some further scoping work. But again, timescale's not yet arranged, but again, happy to come back with some more information once we know exactly what that programme, what that piece of work will cover. And then just a quick update, there's around some of the local government studies. We've been doing a follow-up review of rough sleeping. So as it mentions there, we've been scoping that. Some of the other work is ongoing around emergency services, town centre regeneration, and direct payments. So there's a number of key pieces of work there. And then I know in the update, we've just sort of provided some links to some of the national reports that we've produced or published recently. So that was just a quick overview of the update. I don't know if you want me to pause there to take any questions, Chair, or whether you want me to go into the next bit. I'm just conscious I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, or we can move on to the kind of next bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, any questions, first of all, from any of the committee, first of all? One of the questions I have is that there's a lot of scoping work undertaken, but not we haven't got many dates as yet. So it's really just a case of understanding when the dates will be coming out. What I would be concerned about is if all of the audits hit all at once, and it's the capacity of the staff at BCBC actually being able to respond to. If there's a lot of them coming to any one particular area. So do we have any idea of when the dates will be available? In
terms of the scoping of the Cwmtaf Morgannwg partnership work, Initially, we are thinking potentially around the autumn, but as I mentioned, we've still got further scoping discussions. We want to have discussions with the four bodies together to work through that. So I can provide an update as soon as I know exactly when that will be. The Disabled Facilities Grant, I think, because there was an update at the last audit committee, we need to understand exactly what work we're going to be doing around that, the extent to which, how in depth that review may be or may not be. So, I'd envisage we hopefully have an update at the next committee on that as well. I think they were probably the thematic work I mentioned is going to be sort of later on in the autumn. So they're probably, but we can provide an update should any of those change, or we get further information about the dates for the next meeting.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. And there didn't appear to be any other questions. So if you want to move on to the at your discretion, is that, did you want to cover this off first? Yeah, lovely.
And this is really just to flag this report, which has been published recently. I don't intend to go to any detail around this. It covers an awful lot of ground actually in terms of this report. I hope that there was some really solid arguments made within that. It was just really to flag that. But if there are any particular questions or comments people will want to raise around that, then I'm happy either to kind of try and answer, or then we'll take them back to my colleagues who did the work to get some specific answers. But hopefully the conclusions are set out in the contents page. So just to flag, it was just really to flag it to you that it's been published, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. Williams, you've got your hand up for questions.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question in relation to this report. Page 59 is very useful. Then on page 60, I mean, you're talking here about COVID recovery from COVID. Yeah. Sarah Jane. So I would like to ask you, when you say in the report, sorry, let me just find it again. Bear with me. Sorry. Right. You talk here about the importance of using the experience of the last year, or however many years we're talking now, more than a year, to initiate change and to improve and to use any opportunities that are coming out from the experience. I just wanted to ask you, are you sharing, or is there any plan to share this with Welsh Government, for example, the local government department, or if not, what are your thoughts about ensuring that there is maybe collaboration around this point of using, looking for the opportunities and using the experience to improve in local government. Can you comment a little bit more on that? I'm talking about section 5, page 60, I guess. You're saying that the councils need to build on their response and take the opportunity to transform the way they provide services. But what are your thoughts about making that a strategic effort within Wales?
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Williams. Yes, Chair, if you're happy for me to respond to that.
Please do.
Just to make you aware that I understand that the team who've done this work are actually meeting with the Welsh Local Government Association to consider the report and think about, what this means. The report is obviously being published. It's available on our website, so it's available, to all to see. What I would say is, from my discussions with, a number of councils, I think what is coming out is a recognition that everyone needs to work together, and I'm certainly hearing that a lot when I speak to each of my councils. So in terms of that willingness and building on the opportunity, I'm definitely hearing of lots of early conversations around that. I'll try and get some more information for you, Ms. Williams, about specifically around what we've done to flag this to Welsh Government, and I'll come back to you on that if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Williams, I know in previous meetings you've had issues with your camera. Are you able to switch your camera off when you're not speaking? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah Jane, for that. I was particularly pleased to see that that BCBC did get some praise under Section 3.5 about good approaches in certain aspects, which was great to see. So thank you for that comment on there. And any other? I don't think there's any other questions. Mrs. Williams, if you'd like to lower your, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So Sarah Jane, did you want to carry on the report with the letter at the end of the attachments, or did you want to move on to the NFI report?
I think if I can, just very quickly, I appreciate this has been appended to our report, just to make you aware that this letter has been sent out to all audit committee chairs, not just yourselves.
Yeah.
And it is really, we just wanted to, well, we hope it prompts a discussion, I guess is the point, around governance and audit committees considering what the arrangements they've got in place to actively consider our reports, and what the council is doing about those. Obviously, the governance and audit committee role is changing, is strengthening with the new legislation. And I think the work that we did a number of months ago found that councils, and I'm talking not specifically Bridgend here, but councils' approaches to considering our reports was variable, as it says in that letter. So this is really hopefully to prompt the Governance and Audit Committee to consider how they're going to go about that. But again, happy to take any questions. But I know that the Audit Committee is also keen to hear from Dave, because I know this has been on the agenda. You've been wanting this a while. But yes, if there's anything particular on that letter, then happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a specific question on the letter, and that is that there are so many reports that come out from Audit Wales. Are you able to clarify exactly where the reports are sent to within BCBC? Because the reports on specific areas would go to that specific area, but a number of the thematic reports that are countrywide, is there a set place that you send them to, or is there an expectation that BCBC will continue just to monitor the websites?
If you're happy for me to answer that, Chair, we do our national reports and local government reports get sent out. We have an email communication that tends to have the key contacts. I would imagine it's probably some of your senior officers in the council, but I can double check that. So they're all sort of sent out. But as part of, we recognise we also need to strengthen that. And I mentioned in the letter that we'll be putting together a timetable. Again, that'll be for all 22 councils, which will provide a bit more information, pull it all together, a bit like you've got now with the sort of work programme update, but it'll also include CIW, Care Inspectorate Wales and Estin as well as any of the other local government studies reports. But yes, the council should be aware of some of those reports, but we'll look at that again, and through this timetable look to strengthen that. And if there are particular reports that we think are particularly useful to a certain section, then again that's something we can be more proactive in terms of making people aware of those.
Thank you very much. Jill, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may, just to build on what Sarah Jane has said, we've taken this issue quite seriously, obviously, because we had a discussion with Audit Wales at CMB about how we approach the lessons from some of the national reports, and indeed we've had a discussion at Audit Committee about the very same, making sure that we're taking due cognizance of any of the lessons from those national reports. So we're starting to systematically take those to Corporate Management Board, and that will assist, I think, the Audit Committee in their role as gatekeeper in some ways to scrutiny committees and the governance of the council. But Sarah Jane touched on something about perhaps the systematic receipt of those reports as well. So I'm grateful to you, Sarah Jane, for going back to have a look at that, so that we know instantly that the report has come in, and that means we don't miss anything then. So if they could, I know many of them come to myself, or indeed probably most of them go to Mark as Chief Executive, but I think some do slip the net occasionally, so that would be really good if we could get that system working really well, and then I think we've got something in place to address that.
Thank you, Jill. Mrs. Williams, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I'll leave my camera off if that's okay. I just wanted to ask about the letter, the last, on the last page and almost the last paragraph, second last paragraph, I think, or the second larger paragraph. You talk there about setting expectations for, you know, how councils should, or setting your expectations about what councils should, how they should deal with your recommendations. And find out whether these expectations have been met. Are you able to give us, you know, some flavour of what you're thinking around how are you going to find that out, and you know, on the time scale for this? You know, this letter has been sent to our chair, but you know, when are you looking to make this more targeted approach that you call it? Could you maybe give us some idea around that, please?
Yes, Chair, if you're happy for me to respond. We will be doing this from now on. So we've got a number of local government studies reports that are mentioned in that the update that I gave. So we'd expect within that hopefully to give greater clarity around our expectations about how we'd expect councils to deal with the recommendations within those reports. And similarly, the timetable I mentioned within that letter that we mentioned, that will be hopefully, you know, coming forward fairly promptly. We will be issuing that quarterly. As it says, there will be CCing it to the Governance and Audit Committee chairs. I think we can discuss locally, you know, whether we continue to bring that to Audit Committee. But that is certainly our intention to do that fairly soon. I don't know if that answers your question, Mrs. Williams, specifically.
Yes, certainly on the timing, and I guess what you're saying is that there will be more detail about these expectations and how you will find out whether they have been met.
Yes, I think on that point, it really depends what they are. I think that may be on a case-by-case basis, depending on exactly what the recommendations are in the local government studies reports, for example, and in terms of how we'll go about dealing with them, or how on the expectation side of it. And then may, you know, we may well, for example, say that we'll be doing some more follow-up. I don't know, depending what comes out of each one, but that is something that with forthcoming reports, yeah, we are proposing that we'll be clearer on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah Jane, and thank you, Mrs. Williams. So can we hand over to Jason then for the report on the National Fraud Initiative, please?
Yeah, it'll actually be Dave Rees who I'll be passing on to. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dave.
Apologies. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, Dave.
Good afternoon, all. I'm David Rees. I lead on the National Fraud Initiative in Wales. And where I'd like to start is just a big thank you to the committee for inviting me along today. Normally when I'm invited to audit committees, it's because something has gone horribly wrong. And I know it's going to be a very tough audit committee. In this instance, I'm actually here with good news to tell you about the National Fraud Initiative and some of the developments that are taking place with it. I'm going to put up a presentation on the screen. Hopefully the IT will work.
Yeah, it's there, Dave.
Can I check out? Everybody can see it?
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, it's there.
That is great.
Yeah.
What I'm going to cover in the next few minutes is just tell you a little bit about what the National Fraud Initiative, and I'll just talk about NFI, is and how it works. Give you some examples of the type of things it finds. Then talk about how it's being developed going forward, and then open it up for questions. I'm just trying to get it just so that it's on the single page. Never mind. NFI is a sophisticated data matching exercise with the purpose of attempting to identify anomalies which might be due to fraud or, in some cases, error. To give you an idea what that means in practice, it takes data from numerous different bodies, matches it together to look for things which are potentially incompatible. So, for example, it might be somebody who is in receipt of a local authority service or benefit, and yet we have records from DWP to show that that person died 3 years ago. Clearly can't be the case. Or it may pick up an employee of an organisation who has full-time contracts at 3 different organisations at the same time. Incompatible can't possibly be the case. So it matches that data together and provides that data back to the organisations who supplied it to actually investigate those anomalies. NFI has been around for a long time. It started in 1996. It's undertaken every 2 years, and it's grown over the years and has become increasingly more successful. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. NFI runs across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's particularly important because, of course, fraudsters don't observe organisational boundaries or even national boundaries. If they're committing fraud in Wales, they may well be committing fraud across the border in England, Scotland or Northern Ireland as well. So it's wonderful to be able to bring data together from across the UK. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the data involved in NFI, there is over 1,300 organisations which participate in NFI, providing 8,000 different data sets and submitting them for the purposes of the exercise. That resulted in the latest exercise with 9 million data matches released. That's 9 million essentially anomalies which need to be looked at and examined. Since NFI started in Wales, it's been used to detect fraud or error amounting to £43 million. So it's a significant sum of money. Now, I don't want you to try and read the slide. What this slide is the home page for NFI. NFI operates entirely through a web application. So everything to do with NFI works through this secure web application. Organisations submit their data. They receive matches back through the web application. They have training videos on how to investigate matches within here, and all the work that takes place to investigate the matches is recorded within the secure web application, and any outcomes that have actually been identified are also recorded within the web application. So to give an idea of who participates in NFI in Wales, well, all unitary local authorities supply data to NFI. Police and fire bodies do, NHS bodies do. They are the bodies which are required by legislation to submit data. In addition, there are a number of voluntary participants. The Welsh Government submits its data to NFI, as to most of the Welsh Government sponsored bodies. We ourselves submit our own data. It would be a little bit hypocritical of us if we were to ask others to submit data and not do it ourselves. So we submit data, and Estyn do as well. For the first time in 2020-21, Natural Resources Wales, the Welsh Revenue Authority and Health Education and Improvement Wales have submitted their data to NFI. And NFI, the reason I put this slide up is it just gives you some idea of the scale of the data sets that are actually submitted. So we've got information such as council tax records, housing benefit records, payroll data, immigration data, state benefit data. It's got information on known use of known fraudulent. It's got data on whether it's known names and addresses which have been used fraudulently, so identity fraud records. It's got details on council tenancies, on deceased persons record, and not on this slide simply because I haven't yet worked out how to edit the slide. We got a number of new data sets come into the latest exercise, which includes HMRC data and COVID-19 grant payment data. So it is a huge exercise, and any of these data sets can be matched with any other data set to identify potential anomalies. So what are the benefits to public bodies in participating in NFI? Well, the first is it is a very, very useful tool in helping to detect and prevent fraud. One thing it does do, the matches are usually about fraud which has already taken place, and that's about detection. But NFI also contains the facility to check applications for services and benefits at the point at which those applications are made, i.e., the best solution is to stop fraud taking place in the first place, rather than having to investigate after the event. Secondly, when fraud and errors are actually identified, it's usually because there is a weakness in the control environment, or often is at least. So one of the benefits is it can identify weaknesses which can then actually be addressed to prevent further frauds or errors occurring. One of the big benefits for audit committees is where NFI is used effectively, it can provide assurance that counter fraud controls are operating effectively within the body. It's a very useful collaborative tool, because the benefits to Bridgend are not simply about detecting fraud at the council's end, but it can help other public bodies also detect fraud. So when Bridgend submits data and that is matched with data for Lambeth, on occasions it will help Lambeth to actually identify and address fraud being committed in London. So it is about joining together the collective resources of public bodies across the UK in a collective fight against fraud. And the final benefit that I've actually outlined is NFI has a significant deterrent effect. When fraudsters realise that data is being matched and there is a good chance that they are going to be found, they will tend to stop using a particular method of committing fraud. So there is a wider deterrent effect beyond the size of the savings that can be generated as a result of investigating the matches. And this, again, I don't try and look in too much detail at this slide because I'm only going to speak very briefly about it. NFI started as a pilot in 1993, the main exercise in 1996, and since that date, it has identified fraud and error amounting to 1.93 billion across the UK. But the interesting thing you can see on the diagram in front of you is that initially NFI was relatively small scale. Each exercise, a small amount of fraud detected, 19 million, 42 million, 54 million. The last exercise identified fraud of 246 million, and the one before that 292 million. It's grown exponentially over a period of time. The main reason for that is NFI has continued to be developed. New participants have come on board, new data sets, new matches, and each time those developments have taken place, it is added to the success of the exercise. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impact. So what were the outcomes of the last NFI exercise, which was reported last year? Well, in Wales, it found 8 million of fraud and overpayments, which was an increase from 5.4 million the previous exercise. Most of the savings I identified were savings which related to local authorities. The main reason for that is simply because of the range of different services and benefits which are actually provided by local authorities. The one word of caution that I use about the in terms of what we found is when we looked across public bodies to see how well they were engaging in the exercise and to what extent they were making good use of the initiative, we found there was significant variability between bodies. Some were rigorously looking at the outputs, at the matches, and investigating, and were able to identify savings. Others were far less proactive. And I'll speak specifically about Bridgend in just one moment. The link to the national report, if you want to have a look at it, is available, and I will make the slides available for you to have a look at after the meeting. These are some of the headline messages from the last exercise. This is Wales as a whole. One of the things it identified was a lot of cases of people who'd applied for council tax single person discount, but the exercise had identified that they weren't in fact living alone. There were other eligible adults in the premises, and as a result, 3,939 cases of illegitimate claims for council tax single person discount were identified and cancelled, resulting in significant savings to the public purse, not just in terms of the overpayments that have taken place, but also the prevention of further discounts being granted. It found two examples of 2,354 blue badges had continued to be circulated after the holder had died. Some of those were being used by other people. It identified 179 fraudulent or erroneous claims for housing benefit. It identified 10 cases of pensions remaining in payments significant amount of time after the pensioner had died. It identified 74 fraudulent cases of applications for social housing, 11 cases where residential care homes, where the placements were being paid for by local authorities, had continued significantly for a significant amount of time after the residents had actually died. And it found 11 cases of people claiming reductions in council tax due to low income, but who were not declaring their full income, or in fact were making duplicate claims for council tax reduction at different local authorities. Now I will give you an example of that in just a moment. So what about Bridgend County Borough Council? Well, I said there was variability in the way that local authorities and other bodies use NFI. I'm very pleased to be able to say that in Bridgend's case, there has been very proactive engagement with NFI. Reviews take place promptly, and matches are investigated in a proportionate manner. So Bridgend is one of those which is a good authority from an NFI perspective. I'm pleased to say that, and I know that Jill has been a big advocate of NFI over a number of years. In terms of specifics, in the last exercise, the council identified through investigating the matches 221 cases where there were overpayments due to fraud and error, and have been able to recover those overpayments. 7 cases related to students wrongly claiming housing benefit. 7 where members of staff had claimed housing benefit or council tax reduction but not declared their full income. 2 where council tax reduction was being wrongly claimed, and 187 cases of ineligible claims for council tax single person discount. And in addition, the council was able to cancel 397 blue badges where the applicant, where the holder was actually found to have died. I'm just putting up one small case study. Now this has been taken. I took this a few days ago from the web application. I've obviously anonymized it to remove reference to, take out names and addresses, but it just gives you an idea of the type of thing which this can do. In February of 2019, the council was contacted through the web application by RCT because a match had been sent both to Bridgend Council and RCT Council, and the match showed that an individual had been claiming council tax reduction and housing benefit in both council areas at the same time. There was communication between the two councils to actually establish the circumstances, and it was found that the claimant had moved from the Bridgend area to the RCT area, but the claims in the Bridgend area had not been cancelled. Further investigation by Bridgend actually found that the benefits were actually being, or the housing benefit was being paid to the landlord, and it was decided that the liability for the overpayments sat with the landlord, not the tenant, because it was the landlord who was actually receiving the benefit. The total overclaim by the landlord of housing benefit plus the underpayment of council tax in this instance amounted to a total of £4,302.15. So it's a significant amount of money in respect of just one case. I just want to finish the presentation with just one slide. Fraudsters don't stop. When one method of fraud is not working, they will switch and try something else. So for NFI to continue to be effective, what needs to happen is NFI has to keep on top of things. NFI has to adapt, work in new areas. So all the time we're looking at pilot exercises of new areas in which we could possibly detect fraud and error. And on this slide, and I'm not going to run through the detail on this slide, it just shows you the range of things which are currently in process, which we're looking at. One of the key ones I mentioned earlier, that we now had HMRC data. The ability now to exercise the ability to access HMRC data, particularly around things like pay as you earn, is a real bonus for NFI. It means that we can now reliably check what people have disclosed for means tested benefits and services, and has the potential to significantly increase the amount of savings that can be generated through NFI. But the main point I want to make on this slide is quite simply that NFI is growing and developing, and in our view is an incredible useful exercise and tool for public bodies to use as part of their wider counter fraud framework. And at that point, I will stop. I will stop sharing my screen if I can.
Thank you very much for that very very detailed presentation, Dave, and for going through everything for us. It was really good to hear your views that this is something that we are doing well, and that our fraud team are managing our NFI case as well. That's really great news. So I can see a couple of people have got their hands up. So going first to Pam Davis, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions, really. I'm wondering, as there's such a lot of information on the site, what are the security aspects? Because obviously with data protection, it has a lot of personal and people's, and I suppose you can say, well, if you don't do anything wrong, you don't have to worry about having your details on there. But obviously there are people doing wrong. Have they the ability to go into personal bank accounts like the DWP when they're chasing tax and VAT and things like that? And although you're saying £8 million in Wales, how much of that have we actually recovered and have gone back in the coffers? And is there a facility there? I know you know, on the actual one of the slides, it was such a lot that my eyes couldn't take it all in. But is there a facility? Because I know when people die, and I'm thinking of my own dad 11 years ago, the registry now, the registry office, you give them the details and they cancel things like passports and driving licenses, which is really important because there's a hell of a big scam, excuse my French, on passports. If they get in the wrong hands, well, we know where that can lead to. And I'm thinking of obviously hostile people coming into our country and hostile people leaving our country. So I'll leave it at that for the time being and hope that we get some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there was a few different questions there. I'll try and deal. If I forget what some of them were, please remind me, and I'll come back to them. In terms of the security aspect.
Screen on, Dave. Can I just interrupt? Sorry, you've still got your screen on. I sent you a message.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just 1 second, and I will stop sharing my screen. If I can work out how to do it. There we go. Is that done it?
That's worked. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. In terms of the security element of NFI, there is a number of different things which come into play. The first thing is we operate NFI under statutory powers. We are obliged to publish a code of data matching practice, which it's a statutory code which sets out how we will undertake data matching exercises such as NFI. When we introduce new components to NFI, each time the first place we go is the Information Commissioner and talk about the question of compliance with data protection, whether what we're planning is proportionate. We have to be able to show that what we're matching is because there is an appreciable risk of fraud. So we don't just match anything. It goes through a very carefully considered process and is viewed by the Information Commissioner as well. In terms of the information that's held, the NFI is audited by in accordance with the government's national security standards to ensure that everything is very secure. What's provided back out to organisations is very carefully managed as well. So, for example, whilst we do ask for details such as bank details, so that we can match, for example, where somebody is using the same account to receive payroll income as they are having benefits paid into. But when the information comes back, it doesn't show the bank details. It just shows that there is a match between bank details. So it's not giving away information which then could be misused. So is that the security side I've dealt with? Please, could you remind me the next part of the question?
Yeah, the next part was Wales. You said there was a saving of 8 million. How much in actual terms have we got that money going back into the coffers? And the fourth one was about driving licenses and passports and important documentation once a person has passed away. Thank you.
Yes, I'll deal with the second part first. In terms of passports and that type of documentation, there is a number of matches within NFI which are helping to deal with the possibility of misuse of passports and driving licenses and things like that. One of the data sets that we actually hold is information from the Met Police on the use, the known use of false identities, and that's normally done because of passports, driving licenses. People have been able to masquerade as somebody else. So we use that data from the Met Police, and if we see those identities coming up on people that public bodies have been doing business with, we alert them to that so that they can check that they're actually dealing with the individual themselves. We don't see passports or driving licenses ourselves, so all we're doing is we're passing on information about through the Met Police's database. In relation to this question about how much do we recover to the public purse, the answer to that is it's roughly in the region of 50% of what is identified. Now, there's a reason it's not 100%. Quite often because we have people who have absconded. Often those who have actually committed fraud, when they're investigated, actually have already spent what they'd received fraudulently, and therefore have not got the means to make repayment. Some things are easier to be dealt with in terms of recovery. So, for example, if somebody remains in receipt of certain payments or benefits, the public bodies will put a deduction on the payments to recover some of those overpayments. But I think the biggest issue is not so much the recovery of the fact that if those frauds and errors hadn't been detected, it is likely that those payments would have continued for a significant period of time after the point at which they were actually detected. So it's what it's actually saving in terms of forward payments is as important as what is actually recovered, and as I mentioned earlier, the deterrent effect itself. But in terms of the percentage, it's around about 50%.
Is that okay, Pam?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm thinking of it's like Big Brother watching you, but you know, the 3 services, they actually sell information to the papers. So early evening, they will ring up and say to the ambulance service or the police, have you had anything juicy tonight? And then they will put it that there's been a 3-car pileup on the M4 or whatever. They sell that information. Now, I'm only in the know because obviously I've got the NHS under my belt for about 35 years. But people who don't even know that they're on, there is a national computer, which we all know about, but there's even a bigger one than that, which the MI5 keep and is only available to, shall I say, police officers and obviously security services, which have your DNA on there. So anyone that gives a urine sample or a blood sample to the NHS, without them knowing, that's actually sold to that organisation. And I'm not saying it's your organisation, but so people are aware, your DNA is already there. So, you know, there is a lot more to this country than what people think. So,
could I just come back with a little bit of reassurance from an NFI perspective? The NFI itself is not run as a private enterprise. NFI runs under statutory powers, and the only legal use that can be made of the data is for the purposes of preventing and detecting fraud. So it can't be sold, it can't be used for any other purposes other than fraud prevention and detection. And all the data that's actually submitted, there are privacy notices provided to those whose data will be submitted. So people are informed that their data will be used, will be shared, and it can't be then used subsequently other than to identify these potential frauds and errors. So there isn't a possibility of it being of NFI data going outside of that environment.
Oh, well, that's reassuring. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you for that reassurance, David. So next person up is Elaine. Councillor Elaine Venables, please.
Hi. What I'd like to know is, with the NFI, do you look for patterns, or do you just look at each individual incident? Sort of my first question. And then my second question is, are there any problems with the NFI? I was just thinking about the recent post office miscarriage of justice, and so I was just wondering how that kind of all tied in, really.
In terms of the first part of the question, we do not do any sort of profiling. So it is individually based, and in fact we're prevented by the legislation doing profiling to say if somebody has got these characteristics, then they are more likely to commit fraud. Therefore, look at these particular group. Each match is looked at in respect of the detail of that match. So no, and we don't look at trends other than saying actually over a period of time we've seen this type of fraud occurring more and more often, but that's about reporting rather than the way that they're investigated. In terms of issues and problems with NFI, obviously one of the issues is that not all of the matches that are provided back are frauds or errors. There can be issues with data quality. There can be a number of false positives. So that's why I made the point that what we provide back to bodies are anomalies to be considered to determine whether they are frauds or errors. So a problem would be if individual bodies took those matches and said we have all of these frauds because we got all of these matches. Most of the matches won't be frauds. Yeah, so that's one of the issues. But we make it very clear that all we're providing is intelligence of what are essentially high-risk cases, and they would need to be investigated individually.
So if there's two the anomalies that you find that are kind of linked, that's for the body that you're passing the information on to investigate and link up.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then the final person with hand up is Councillor Bridie Sedgbeer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, in terms of the anomalies, whether I'm just thinking in terms of my day job's a casework, and I work for a Member of Parliament, and lots of constituents that I get in touch with, or constituents through my council work, often aren't on the benefits they actually are entitled to. And I was just wondering whether some of the anomalies that come up are anomalies sort of the other way. So it's not people committing fraud, it's not people overclaiming, it's actually people who, for some reason or other, aren't claiming what they're entitled to. And I was just wondering whether your system could actually also be used to help people in terms of making sure that they're getting what they're entitled to. And then I was also wondering, in terms of some of the cases that you've touched upon, whether it can help people get out of situations that they're in, again, not because they are actively wanting to commit fraud, but because they may not have the skills or the knowledge or the understanding of the system, and they've got themselves into they've had overpayments through no real fault of their own, but it takes a long time for the system to go through, and then all of a sudden they're in £3,000-4,000 worth of overpayments. Whereas, is there a way that the system can pick it up sooner for them to be notified so we can stop it sooner? So, like I said, it's not them intentionally claiming it fraudulently, it's errors that then make it difficult for them in the future?
I think that's a couple of really good questions. Coming to the first question, I really would like to do what you're describing, because what we do sometimes see when we see the data, examples of where probably people have underclaimed, and that does come out. And obviously that's something that can be addressed in terms of when those matches are actually looked at by the individual body. The difficulty we have with that is I would love to include within the design of NFI specifically to look for those examples, so that the system was designed not just to identify overpayments, but also to identify underpayments. The reason we can't do that at the moment is because the legislation doesn't allow us to, because what it actually says is that we can run these exercises specifically and only for the purposes of preventing and detecting fraud. So there is some thought at the moment about how we can have legislation amended to provide wider purposes than just that one. And what you've described is one that I would really like to be included. In terms of the second part of the question, the best way of actually preventing people getting into difficulty is to actually be actively looking at the point of application, rather than after the event, by which time people have already maybe an error, or maybe error, ignorance, or because they are desperate, they've already run up very, very significant overpayments. Now NFI was adapted a few years ago to include a facility called NFI App Check, which enables a public body to do the checks on what's been disclosed on applications at the point the application is received. So that would be the ideal time to actually get alongside people when it does flag up, actually there is a problem here with this application. And it shouldn't be simply a question of is this fraud? It should also be a question of, is this somebody who needs support and help?
Okay. Thank you. Is that okay, Bridie?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think what the last point you said, David, about, is this someone who actually needs help? I think sometimes when we use the word fraud, fraudulent claims, we're always thinking about the baddies, and that there's always going to be people who are going to, want to fraudulently claim from the system. I'm not saying that's not, and obviously the work we're doing is invaluable, but there are also, as we know, so many people that, like you said, are desperate, and they're not doing it in a malicious way, or even in a way that they think they're doing wrong. It's about trying to make sure that we have a safety net there for a reason. We need to make sure that people are using the safety net appropriately, but we also need to make sure that people are accessing the safety net and not falling through the gaps as well. But thank you.
Chair, could I just make one comment about that? I think it is also why it's so important in terms of the way that even when overpayments are identified, that the first instinct should not be let us prosecute. It should be looking again at the individual case and what has led to this situation, and I think, to be fair, most local authorities in Wales are not necessarily quick to prosecute as many people as possible. I think generally there is the effort to actually try and deal with things in as long as there is not somebody who is obviously set out to abuse the system, but there is an effort to look at how to deal sympathetically with the situation. Let me put it that way.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. That's been really informative. So, and thank you for agreeing to send the presentation through to Mark Galvin. Yeah, that's great, and look forward to the next lot of reports coming through to our fraud team. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our Audit Wales colleagues for the presentations and updates today. Could I have a mover, please, to say that we have noted and considered all of the Audit Wales reports, please?
Move.
Thank you. Lovely. So we're now going to move on to agenda item number 8, which is the statement of accounts. And just to say that within the papers that have been distributed and under this section, it also includes the annual governance statement, but we'll cover that off after we've considered the Porthcawl Harbour Return. So Jill, Nigel, I'm going to hand over to you now. So thank you very much. And David, if you're able to turn your camera off, that would be lovely. Thank you.
I will leave the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to swiftly hand over to Nigel, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jill. Nigel Smith, Interim Group Manager, Chief Accountant. The purpose of this report is to present to the committee the unaudited statement of accounts for 2021 for noting. My intention was to do a presentation. I'm conscious of time, so I'm probably up to you, Chair, whether you want me to do that or just run through some of the key points in the accounts.
I'm happy for you to run through the key points in the accounts, and if I could ask that the presentation, which I have seen, is shared with all of the committee members afterwards, please, Nigel, so that they have got that. Thank you.
Of course, no problem. The accounts are prepared under a regulatory framework and are compiled in accordance with the relevant code of practice, the Chartered Institute Public Finance and Accountancy Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting. The Accounts and Audit Wales Amendment Regulations require that the draft statement of accounts are certified by the Section 151 officer by the 31st of May 2021, and that the audited statement of accounts are presented to the Governance and Audit Committee and certified by the Section 151 officer and chair of committee by the 31st of July 2021. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pressures that we've all faced, we were not able to meet the 31st of May deadline. So in line with regulation, we did issue a Regulation 10 notice just advising that we wouldn't do that, but we would prepare them as soon after the 31st of May as possible. And the accounts, as our audit colleagues have advised, were passed to Audit Wales on the 11th of June 2021, last Friday, and signed. The narrative report, some of the key areas within the accounts, the narrative report, which is pages 78 to 87 of the pack, provides some key information around the background of the council. And one of the things that is quite key, obviously, this year is the inclusion of information around COVID-19. In that section, we talk about the amount of business grants that the council administered on behalf of Welsh Government and paid out to businesses of around 52 million. In addition to that, the council received hardship payments of over 20 million and had in excess of 13,004 or nearly 13,400 additional payments being processed during the year as a result of that. Within the narrative report, pages 83 and 84 set out the sources of funding and the nature of expenditure, the spending and the council outturn, and they're graphically represented to make that a bit easier to understand. The year-end position from a budget perspective was a 0.432 million underspend, and that's set up on page 84 of the pack. The council holds in the region of £537 million of assets, which includes operational assets, land and buildings, offices, vehicles, plant and equipment. It has a 10-year capital programme of £170 million. And there's a chart at the top of page 85 of your pack that sets out sort of the balance sheet value of the council. Its assets on the left, on the right-hand side of the triangle, on the left-hand side of that is its assets, on the right-hand side the liabilities, and how those are underpinned by reserves of the council. The key statements, the 4 key statements, the income and expenditure statements sort of sets out the income we receive and how we spend it. The movement in reserve statement says how that transfers into the various reserves that we have available either for use or not available for use because they're accounting adjustments. And the balance sheet shows the net worth of the council or the financial position of the council. And what the cash flow statement on page 93 does is try and take all those adjustments out and say what's happened to cash, how much cash have we had in and how have we spent it. There are, as I say, the accounts do have a number of adjustments for things like depreciation, revaluations and so forth. These are non-cash adjustments that we have to put through to the accounts, which means that there's a difference then between what we say in terms of the budget outturn, 432 million, and the bottom line of the comprehensive income expenditure statement of 14.54 million. Those will all be audited, and I say they're all adjustments that we have to do statutorily, and most of those will move to unusable reserves in the balance sheet. Some of the key disclosures that members may want to consider is note 6 on page 112, which is the expenditure and income analysed by nature. This shows the key headings of income and expenditure that the council undertakes during the year. Precepts and levies on page 113. We receive income on behalf of the police and fire authorities and the CREMs that we then pass over. Analysis of grants received on page 114. How our assets are broken down is set out on page 127 of the pack. And the capital spend for 2021 of 23.461 million, and how we funded that is set out on page 128. Earmarked reserves have seen an increase year on year. The council fund at the end of the year, 31st March 2021, sat at 9.772 million. This represents a 4.6% increase from the opening balance, and that's in line with our medium-term financial strategy. Principle 9, which says that we'll maintain a balance of 5%, of at least 5% of the net budget excluding schools, and it's currently at something like 5.29%. That is in school balances, although they've seen reduction over the previous number of years, have seen a significant increase this year of 8.38 million. That is primarily attributable to the Welsh Government grants that were received for things like free school meals and also reduced costs due to COVID-19. Other earmarked reserves have increased by just under £19 million. Capital, 7.8 million, and that's to meet future capital programme commitments. Grants received in year and at year end carry forward for future commitments, 2.3 million, and further commitment to the city deal of 2.7 million. There are other disclosures throughout the accounts that are quite important in terms of usable reserves and unusable reserves. Also pensions and the pensions liability and our financial instruments, note 31, page 67 onwards. And this covers both assets and liabilities, investments, cash at bank, loans, PWLB, our long-term debt. Also provides some information about our risk in terms of credit risk, liquidity risk and market risks that we'd be familiar with from Treasury Management Strategy. As I mentioned, just to finish there, really, the accounts have been passed to audit, and we anticipate that the audit accounts will return to the committee on the 22nd of July for approval, and hoping that the Auditor General will sign on the 23rd of July, with the aim to publish our accounts in line with the statutory requirement of the 31st of July. Happy to take any questions. Sorry, Chair, I think you might be on mute.
And I had a note to myself not to do that, so apologies. Thank you very much for that, Nigel. And before I open up for any questions and comments, I'd like to thank Nigel and the team for all the work that has gone into preparing these accounts. I personally have found the narrative easier to read this year. And also to reflect on what you said within your presentation, Nigel. It's been a tough year for the finance team, having to process all of the COVID-related grants on top of the normal day job. So please do thank the team for all of their hard work. It's much appreciated. And if I can go to Mrs. Williams, you've got your hand up for a question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two key questions really, and I'll keep it to that. Are we entitled to feel pleasantly surprised, I wonder, with the result, with the fact that, you know, in fact we've got a very small agreed but an underspend of the budget in this very difficult year that we've experienced, and particularly the hit on income, for example, that all councils have suffered. That's my first question. And then my second question is page 110, there's the expenditure and funding analysis. I just wondered if Nigel could comment on I hope I can explain this properly. The marked difference really in the adjustments between the 2 years, this year and the previous year, in relation to other differences. There is a large change there in those adjustments, and I wondered if you could comment on that, or if you don't wish to now, I'm happy to take an answer on that another time. Thank you.
Chair, shall I just take the first bit?
If you're able to, yeah, I didn't know whether Nigel was coming back, Jill, but thank you.
Yes, he will. I'm sure he'll add to it. But Mrs. Williams asked a very pertinent question. The outturn report is going to Cabinet and Council next week, and there'll be an opportunity to look at the position at the year end. It was an extremely difficult year in terms of our expenditure and income on a number of different fronts, and I think that report, which is public, reflects that. We were able to generate a small surplus. We have, however, got a large increase in balances as a result, really, of two things: the Hardship Fund, which was set up by the Welsh Government and on which we were very successful at claiming our expenditure and costs and our loss of income. And secondly, there were a number of significant year-end grants that are designed to help us with the obvious difficulties that we're still in and will continue to be in. So COVID hasn't gone away. We've got significant pressures on social care, and those are going to increase. We've got schools that have very significant additional costs, and I could go on, but the pressures, furlough still hasn't stopped, and we're anticipating obviously pressures once that does come to an end. So what we've been able to do is put some of those balances into earmarked reserves that will help us to manage some of the incredibly difficult situations that we're likely to face. What I should say to the committee, though, is despite that small surplus, the directorates in the main have a large underlying deficit position. And I think that's going to be the problem, is understanding the here and now, but the future pressures and deficit positions as well. So there's a mixed reaction really at the end of the year, I think. So Nigel, sorry, do you want to add to that? And definitely please answer the technical question.
Thanks, Jill. I probably, I think you've said some of that very well there, so I wouldn't add to that. But in terms of the technical question, in terms of the other differences to the note on expenditure funding analysis, I appreciate I went through the presentation fairly quickly, but as one of the things I picked up was the movement in earmarked reserves and moves to earmarked reserves that were done at the end of the year. The other differences include those along with adjustments for capital adjustments, etc. But the most significant move is the schools earmarked reserve transfer of £8 million to schools balances this year, an increase, and also the other earmarked reserve transfers of 18 million. So that's been an increase year on year of approximately 20 million. So that would explain that significant movement that's shown in that table.
Mrs. Williams, did you want to come back on anything on that?
No, thank you. That's adequate. That's adequate for me to digest and think further about. And if I do have any more questions, I'll raise those at the presentation of the audited statement. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Councillor Elaine Venables, please.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to ask about the table on page 118. This might have been obviously in previous meetings, which I might have missed, but on the senior officers' remuneration, the chief executives, pay goes from 132 to 139. And I just wondered why that was, because I understand the other officers and the notes that apply to them. It just seemed to be quite a big jump, and I just wondered why that was.
I'm not sure whether we should be commenting on individual salaries at this meeting. Jill, if that isn't the case, please jump in, but I'm not sure that we should be.
No, I think we'll take that away and come back if we don't want to discuss, if that's okay, Councillor Venables.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah,
thank you.
We'll come back to you.
Thanks. And then Councillor Pam Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, obviously, we're not going to know with this variant called the Delta variant, and obviously, as you're saying, this earmarked reserves for so much. Has thought been put in, although we've got this third wave to actually meet and try and get through, we've still got the patients, if you like, or the people that have got over it, but have got that long term, as they say, after effects, which is going to go on for a number of years by the look of it. So have we, obviously, have we given great thought to that as well? Because, I mean, you never have enough money for social services, etc. We never will, because it grows every year and people expect more and more. But I'm just wondering, obviously, the consideration taken over that. Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Davis. Yes, we've set aside a COVID reserve. We've used some of that during the year for emergency situations, and we've taken the opportunity to top that up at the year end. So we do have some money set aside, obviously, for future COVID issues. But I think the issue that you raise is a whole significant one all on its own, which is how we pay for social care and some of the effects that are yet, I think, to emerge from what has happened through the COVID situation. It's not just people who've got long COVID, it's what's happened as a result of people not coming forward during COVID that's going to materialise. So I am, the Welsh Government are working with local authorities to see how they are able to support. They've continued to support. There is a hardship fund that runs until the end of September. And then I think that there'll have to be some conversations really about what are the pressures. I mean, while I'm here at the Audit Committee, the 151s are meeting to talk about ongoing pressures, some of which will be social care, issues to do with education, undoubtedly, and others. So, we've put aside money, Councillor Davis. Whether that's ever going to be enough, nobody really knows at this stage. But we have been very prudent in terms of putting aside money.
Thank you, Jill. Pam, did you need to come back on that?
No. I mean, the thing is, it's a guessing game, isn't it? How long is a piece of string? We don't know, and we have to go with what we've got at the time. But I didn't expect anything less, to be honest, Jill. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't see anybody else with their hands up. I've got two further questions. On page 92 in the balance sheet, it shows that we're in overdraft, or we were in overdraft. I think that's the first time I've seen it in overdraft on our audited accounts at 4.7 million. So a question about that. And then on page 129, the debtors, we've got a big increase in debtors, and in particular in other recoverables, which has gone up from 25.168 to 43.489. And with my banking hat on, I'm always concerned about debtors. So just wanted to check: are there any worries in either of those areas, please?
I'm starting to panic at this moment because Nigel looks as though he's frozen, and he's best placed to answer both those questions. There is oh, he's still there. There is an explanation. Thank goodness for that. I thought I was going to have to go into that complicated explanation on the overdraft, Nigel.
No, that's no problem. Yes, it is. You're absolutely right. It is unusual, and the reason for us showing that is when we invest our monies, obviously we look to invest them in the best place, but we look to time to get those monies back to ensure we don't go into an overdraft position. And we were anticipating from one of the money market funds monies to be returned to us on the 31st of March. Unfortunately, for an error with the bank rather than with us, it was all programmed in. That money didn't come in until after the year end. Because the team managed that money that well, unfortunately that put us into a temporary overdraft position for a couple of days. But the money did come in just to reinsure the committee, and also we did seek recompense for interest charges from the provider, which they paid. So it is very unusual. I can assure you the team weren't happy, but it was beyond their control, unfortunately. In terms of the increase in debtors, yeah, it is a significant increase in debtors. A large element of that will be in relation to a pool fund arrangement we have for residential care between social services, Cyntaf, Health Board, RCT and Merthyr, whereby we have to contribute funding to the pool and then we claim it back from the pool in terms of expenditure spent. Those discussions have been ongoing during the year to agree that arrangement, and at the end of the year we needed to make a payment of £9 million in total for the whole year. Sounds a lot of money, but that's for the whole year of residential care. £9 million to the pool, which is managed by RCT. So the payment went out after the year, so we recognise the debtor. You'll see an increase in creditors of a similar amount, which is the other entry, if you like. They've got to pay us back. So those two in fact net each other off, but that is £9 million of the increase. We've also seen an increase in terms of our sales ledger of 4.75 million year on year. A lot of invoices were raised right at the end of the year. If we compare last March, we raised something like £5 million of invoices, and this March was 8 million. So there's been an increase there. Our council tax debtor has increased by 2.4 million net, but that's because we weren't able to. There were no court cases during the pandemic year, but now those have started again, so we should be able to start seeking recovery action. So that position should improve. We've got a VAT debtor, 1.3 million, but that's quite normal. No concerns there at all. And also, due to a number of grants that we were anticipating at the end of the year, didn't come in until after the year, we raised the debtor for those as well, and that was about £6 million in total, thereabouts across the services. So that accounts overall for the whole £25 million increase. I wouldn't say there's concerns there. Most of those we would anticipate are just timing instances, really, and timing changes here on year.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Sorry, it's just I can't get out of the habit of looking at bad debts, I'm afraid. So apologies for that. So I can't see any other questions or anybody else wanting to ask questions on this. So thank you very much again for all of the work on the audited accounts or the statement of accounts. Can I ask for a mover and seconder, please, to note the presentation and the statement of accounts, please?
Move.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we will move on to agenda item number 9, which is the Harbour Return. Nigel, I think you're going to be taking us through that again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to present to the committee the unaudited Porthcawl Harbour Return 2020-21 for approval. The preparation of the Harbour Return falls under the same regulations in terms of the Council and Audit Wales Regulations 2014, and its content is defined by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy's Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting in the United Kingdom. The Harbour Return requires certification by the responsible financial officer and approval by the committee by 31st of May 2021, certifying that it presents a true and fair view of the financial position of the harbour. Again, due to the COVID pressures on the services, the return was completed subsequent to the 31st of May, so a Regulation 10 notice was issued to ensure that we comply with regulation. But the return is signed and presented at Appendix A for the committee. The harbour achieved a balanced position as at 31st of March 2021, generated £257,302 in fees, primarily for boat, berthing and mooring. Main items of expenditure of staffing costs, and depreciation of the harbour assets. So the value of the harbour and associated assets, including the kiosk and slipway, as at 31st of March 2021 was £3.057 million. The return has been reviewed by internal audit and no amendments were identified following that review. So once, if the committee are minded to approve, it will then be passed to Audit Wales for their audit.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Nigel. Has anybody any questions for Nigel on the Harbour Return? I can't see any hands up, so can I have comment from the committee that we're happy to approve the audited accounts for the Harbour Return, please?
Move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. Lovely. So now we'll move on then to agenda item number 10. Jill, are you going to introduce and then hand over to Mark Shepherd for the annual governance statement?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the opportunity for the Governance and Audit Committee to look at the annual governance statement. You'll be familiar with this document. You receive it each year at this point in time, and it very much shows how, as a council, whoops, I've just lost the document, sorry, how, as a council, we comply with the Code of Corporate Governance and the requirements of the accounts and audit regulations. And it's a very wide-ranging document, hence the leader and the chief executive sign the document and are responsible for the recommendations in there. So I won't say any more, I'll just simply hand over and welcome the chief executive to the Governance and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Chair. And can I just say, first of all, thank you for the invite to the meeting. I think it's important that I attend this meeting on occasions, and so I'm delighted to be able to do so this afternoon for the duration. Jill set out the purpose of the report. If I may, Chair, just to say a few words, because I do appreciate that it's not the kind of report that's usually likely to get you dancing out of your chairs, but I did want to emphasise that it's really, really important. First of all, for the statutory reasons, the statutory requirements that Jill set out. Perhaps more importantly, though, that it's intended to give all members and indeed residents an assurance of the effectiveness of internal control and governance. And of course, that's incredibly important. And furthermore, it's intended that it should also give us direction in terms of continuous improvement within the council and also managing risks. So I hope that illustrates that it's important. In this particular case, both the Corporate Management Board and Cabinet have reviewed and approved the document, and therefore we commend it to you. But I think it's also just worth saying, as we have in many reports today, to say that in the context of the different operating environment that we're currently working in, there are, of course, some very significant challenges. Just off the top of my head, there's the obvious public health challenge, but in terms of governance, there are financial challenges, both around quantum, but also around the way in which money is received, often at short notice, often at the end of the financial year, often in grant. There is increasing reliance on ICT. We are then potentially more susceptible to things like cyber fraud. There are, of course, an awful lot of people working at home. It doesn't necessarily mean that our current procedures are wrong, but it does mean that we have to review them and ensure that they are suitable for a different operating model. And of course, then there are other matters such as the Local Government and Elections Act, which, and together with a plethora of other things, actually, which mean that we also have to review in the way in which we operate. So I think from my point of view, Chair, I was keen to come along, one, to emphasise the importance, but also it is a wide-ranging document, to also have the opportunity, where I can, to answer any questions that members may have. So with that, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for coming to the meeting today. Before I hand over for any questions, in line with the same way as with the audited accounts, lots of work has gone on the narrative, and it is so much more user friendly, I think, for all of us as councillors, officers, but also for the public to get that, to be able to read and understand. And it does clearly state the actions taken to manage governance during the COVID pandemic and the impacts that has had on our business. So has anybody any questions for Mark? Would you like to raise hands if you would have any comments or questions on the annual governance statement. Councillor Elaine Venables, over to you, please.
Hi, it's just a little question. On page 212, there's the table, sort of the well-being goal table, and I've seen this before, and I've wondered before. Why is there not a tick on a resilient Wales and helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient?
Sorry, I'm trying to find which line you're looking at, Councillor Venables.
So on the sort of the table, the coloured wellbeing goal table.
Oh, the got you. Yeah.
I don't know what you call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
As Mark found it. So it says a resilient Wales, but you haven't ticked the wellbeing objective for being more resilient.
I've asked that very same question before, Councillor Venables. There is an explanation, which at the moment is just escaping me, but it's the definition of resilience in the Future Generations Act that doesn't chime with what we see as resilience. But I can come back to you. I'll ask Wanda to give you the fuller answer that she gave me when I asked exactly the same question a couple of years ago. So it's a very reasonable question.
Apologies, Chair. My silence there was I was struggling to find the page to find specifically what you were looking at. I think, as Jill indicated, there was quite a debate on this table, both at CMB and with Cabinet, for probably the reasons you've just described, because I think probably what's potentially missing is a little explanation of the definitions, which probably dictate which ones we've ticked and which ones we haven't, but we can certainly provide you with that detail.
Okay, that's great. I've got another question actually about on page, hold on. Page 216. I just, on the table there, the Welsh Government Hardship Fund, it says this, I just wanted to know, it said, you know, certain things were disallowed. I just wanted to know whether that was Welsh Government that were disallowing applications, or whether it was BCBC that were disallowing.
We in the main got most of what we bid for. I think Jill can confirm, but I think there was an element of ICT costs in particular where Welsh Government confirmed they'd fund 50%, but the view was that we should fund 50% because, as well as it being a COVID expenditure, it was potentially something useful to us moving forward as well. Is that exactly right, Jill? Just confirm if I've got that wrong.
There were a number of categories that were disallowed. Some were very, very minor, and they just they were very, very consistent. And there were a panel that looked at all 22 hardship claims. So I feel fairly comfortable that it was done very consistently. So as Mark said, the biggest one was the ICT, where we were deemed to have more than just the use for the period of COVID, although who knows how long COVID's going on, it might outdo the use of the ICT in time, but it's obviously not just a temporary thing, because we would have use out of the laptop server, etc. And then there were a number of other things where if the council made a decision that cost them more or forewent income, then that also wasn't allowable. So for instance, if we gave free car parking as a choice, then and extended that, then that wouldn't be claimable. And if we delivered school meals in a different way that cost us slightly more, then we would have got a standard rate. So there were all these different things and they've maintained that for this 6 months as well. Where we make a local decision, then we won't be entitled to get that money back. So I think, and Cabinet, we've appraised Cabinet of that before they come to any decisions. So, but by and large, we were incredibly successful in getting our costs back and our loss of income.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions from anybody any in the committee? No. So one question I have is on the review of financial procedure rules, which was last updated in 2017. Are we aware of any glaring big issues on that we would be that we've got massive concerns, and is that going to be something that needs to be done sooner rather than or very, very quickly, as opposed to in a more timely manner?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a very good point. They were due to be reviewed. As I think the committee will understand, we've had a rather unique year this year. That's not to say that they've just been lying there. Where they've needed updating for various things, they have been updated. And it's one of Nigel's priorities. I think it's fair to say, Nigel and the team going forward, to bring them forward to council with a revised set. So we have looked at them. It's not that we've just ignored them, and by and large they are completely fit for purpose, but they do need updating for various aspects. So yes, good, very good question, Chair.
Thank you. That's great. And of course, with the new bill coming in, all of the updates will be coming on a regular basis so that the committee will be kept informed as to how all of the significant issues are being managed, just so that we can fulfil our role in the governance and oversight of it. So yeah, that would be welcome, I'm sure, by the committee. So thank you very much for all the work that's gone into the governance statement, and Mark for presenting it today. Could I ask the committee that we're all happy to approve and agree the inclusion of the annual government statement in the unaudited statement of accounts, please?
No.
Thank you. And a second? Anybody there to second it?
Second.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're now moving on to agenda item number 11, which is the annual internal audit report. And Mark, I believe you're going to take us through that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, if I can refer you to page 231 of your agenda papers. The purpose of the report is to provide the Head of Internal Audit's annual opinion on the Council's control environment in relation to governance, risk management and internal control, and to inform the Governance and Audit Committee of the work and performance of the Internal Audit Service for the financial year 2021. And perhaps I could just start by saying, from an internal audit perspective, this is probably the most important report of the year. And at the start of the presentation, I'd just like to record my thanks to Joan and the rest of the internal audit team for their work during this most testing of years, as we've already referred to. And obviously the content of this report, the opinion given, actually feeds into the annual governance statement, as was mentioned a little bit earlier. What I'd like to do is take the committee through the covering report fairly quickly, and then just to go into the appendix, which is the main part of the annual report, and just to flag up a few key issues, if everyone is happy with that. Section 3 of the covering report, paragraph 3.1, just sets out the public sector internal audit standards require the Head of Internal Audit to provide an annual report to support the annual governance statements I just mentioned, and the report should include an opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and internal control, present a summary of the audit work undertaken, draw attention to any issues that may impact on the level of assurance provided, provide a summary of the performance of the service, and comment on conformance with the public sector internal audit standards. So I hope when we go through the report, you'll see that the report does those things. I just wanted to mention in paragraph 3.3 there, the draft audit plan for 2021 was due to be presented to Audit Committee in April 2020, but as we'll recall, due to the outbreak of COVID, it delayed the planning process as significant new risks and ways of working had to be considered to inform the plan. The internal audit plan for that year therefore was approved on the 10th of September 2020. The plan recognised there would be a different emphasis to the impact of COVID, particularly risks arising from the pandemic, the availability of audit and service staff, and challenges arising from the remote ways of working, as we've touched on a little bit earlier. The approved plan was also more flexible to be able to respond to changing circumstances and events that may occur during the year as a result of the pandemic. So as mentioned in 3.4 there, that the pandemic has had a major impact on how the council has had to operate and the governance arrangements and processes that were put in place to ensure it could continue to support residents and businesses during this time. The pandemic also changed how audit work was carried out as well, and all staff have worked from home for the year. Audits have been conducted remotely using various digital solutions, holding remote meetings, sharing of screens and sending of data and evidence electronically. And whilst there was a steep learning curve for both audit staff and auditees, all have adjusted well to the new ways of working. Audits have taken longer in some instances due to responses to draft reports being delayed where services have been under pressure, but generally things have gone to plan. In terms of the current situation and the details set out in the report, the detailed report is set out at Appendix A, which summarises the reviews undertaken during the year, including any counter fraud work, the recommendations made and any control issues identified, and the committee has been updated as we've gone through the year on those sorts of issues as well. So this is just summarising the key issues. A total of 26 recommendations were made. 26 reviews were completed with an audit opinion, and a total of 38 medium recommendations made. A detailed breakdown is included in Annex 1 of the Appendix A. The annual report also discusses the performance of the service during the year, including benchmarking its performance against other local authorities and highlighting individual staff development training that takes place. Annex 2 then basically identifies the planned audit reviews that were undertaken despite the pandemic and the impact that has led to demands on services, as well as the impact of adopting to remote working. It did have some impact on the plan and delivery of the plan, but the level of internal audit coverage was still sufficient for me to be able to give an opinion. So that's basically what that is saying. And the important bit, I suppose, the headline, it is in paragraph 4.4, taking into account the results of the internal audit reviews completed during the year, the recommendations made, and considering other sources of assurance, the Head of Internal Audit's annual opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and internal control for 2021 is of reasonable assurance. No significant cross-cutting control issues have been identified that would impact on the Council's overall control environment, and the weaknesses identified are service-specific. So that's the headlines, that's the overall summary. If I just can take you through the report in a little bit more detail, just flag up a couple of points that I wanted to draw to the committee's attention. Section 3, when I get there, which is on page 238 of your agenda papers, just identifies those reports, limited reports in terms of the opinion that we've identified. So one there in relation to supported living, missing money, which the committee is aware of, which is relatively low value, but again, we're just flagging up the issue, and additional learning needs out of authority charges, that was also flagged up. But as I said, committee is aware of those issues. And paragraph 3.4 identifies some follow-up work that we've done basically on areas that had limited opinion previously. I'm pleased to say both those areas, the BACS follow-up and the Ogmoville Primary School, demonstrated improvements, and both were given a reasonable audit opinion when we did the follow-up. Section 4, I'm just going to flag up there the recommendations that we've made during the year, but the key point was we follow up on those on a regular basis, and in respect to the recommendations made, all that were due to be implemented at the time of writing this report have been, so that's a positive message as well. Section 5 on page 240 just mentioned some counter fraud work, and following on from what the presentation from David Rees from Audit Wales earlier, internal audit work work with the fraud investigator in terms of the National Fraud Initiative and other staff in Bridgend in terms of coordinating the work on the NFI. In addition, there was a couple of pieces of work that we were involved with, more investigative type work. One was supported living, which I mentioned earlier, and there was another issue that was discussed at the last audit committee, the Governance and Audit Committee, relating to a data breach, which has now been dealt with as well. Just moving on, the last point I wanted to draw to, or the last 2 points I wanted to draw to members' attention was in section 10, which is on page 243 of your agenda papers. It just gives an update on the regional audit service, which, as you know, covers the 4 authorities. But just to mention paragraph 2.5 and a couple of points following on from that, the new staffing structure has been developed and is expected to be agreed very shortly. Consultation with the trade unions and staff will take place over the summer, with recruitment to vacant posts will commence shortly after that. So just by way of an update to members. The next point is, I've already covered really about the way the audit service has been delivered in terms of remote work, and that, but I covered that in the covering report. And the last point I wanted to mention in this section was the services procured a new audit software to support the way that it works, to have a consistent approach across the 4 authorities, and intensive work has been taken place to set up the system, train staff and determine and agree consistent working practices and methodologies across the service, including new report format and consistent terminology, and that has been rolled out from April just gone. The last point was just reinforces what I said in the covering report, really, which is in relation to the overall opinion. The opinion is effectively broken down into 3 elements, which covers risk management arrangements, governance arrangements, and internal control. And you can see on page 246 of your agenda papers that an opinion of reasonable assurance has been given to all 3, and that then follows on to the overall opinion, which I've already stated, which is repeated on page 247, which is an overall opinion of reasonable assurance. And at that point, I'll pause and happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's good to know that we have reasonable assurance for the last year. So thank you for that, and for all the work that the team has been doing. Any questions for Mark, please, from the committee? Nope. Okay. Well, Mark, that's great news. So thank you very much. And could I ask for a mover and seconder that we've considered and approved that we've given consideration to the annual internal audit report, including the head of internal audit's annual opinion of effectiveness of governance and control.
Move.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to agenda item number 12, please, which is the annual internal audit strategy and plan for 2021 to 22. So Mark, over to you again.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chair. This will be a bit briefer in terms of the presentation. The purpose of the report is to provide members of the Governance and Audit Committee with the annual internal audit strategy and risk-based plan for 21-22. You'll see there in section 3 of the covering report, paragraph 3.2, in line with the public sector internal audit standards, the head of internal audit must establish risk-based plans to determine the priorities of the internal audit activity consistent with the organisation's goals. To develop the risk-based plan, the head of internal audit consults with senior management to obtain an understanding of the organisation's strategies, key business objectives, associated risks and risk management processes. The head of audit must review and adjust the plan as necessary in response to changes in the organisation's business, risks, operations, programmes, systems and controls, and so on. You'll see there in 3.4, in order to produce the plan, the following information is taken into account. It lists a range of key documents there, such as the corporate risk register, corporate plan, and various other elements also. 3.6, by taking into account the sources of information noted above, this supports the internal audit to achieve the following: to comply with the internal audit standards in compiling the draft annual plan, enable the Governance and Audit Committee to monitor the adequacy of the risk management framework and the associated control environment of the Council based on the audit reviews, and enables the Head of Internal Audit to form an opinion on the risk governance and internal controls of the organisation. So it's a full circle. Basically, it basically sets out the work we will do to enable an opinion to be given in 12 months' time or thereabouts. And obviously regard has been given to the way the council has been operating and is continuing to operate as a result of COVID, and also taking into account any new risks that will emerge during the year. In relation to section 4 then of the covering report, Appendix A is referred to, which sets out in detail the draft internal audit strategy document. That in itself covers a range of things, including a definition of internal audit, what the legal basis for the service is, the Section 151 officer responsibilities and how internal audit supports the Section 151 officer, development of the plan, the methodology and process, and generally the audit approach and opinions. Essentially then, in terms of the work that we plan to cover, that is set out in Appendix B, which is a fairly lengthy list of areas that we intend to cover that will enable an opinion to be provided in relation to governance, risk and internal control. And that's been done, as I said, touched on earlier, having had quite extensive discussions with senior officers across the authority. And as members will be familiar, we give regular updates to members in terms of the progress during the year on the work that we were undertaking and the opinions that we will give as audits are concluded. I think I will pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I can see that Mrs. Williams has some questions for you.
Okay.
Mrs. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think actually I've been having my mic on all the time, so apologies. Maybe someone else put that on. Anyway, Mark, I've got two questions really about this, annual plan, also called strategy, risk management strategy, etc. I'm just interested really in, a more strategic time frame, I suppose, a longer time frame, and to what extent has that been considered, or to what extent is that going to become, thought about in terms of getting a longer view embedded in your plan? And I'm thinking about that as well, and I would like your view about your relationship with Wales Audit, because we look at their reports. They're talking about, as I asked about earlier, they're talking a lot more now about looking for the improvements, looking for the opportunities that have come out of the experience of COVID, and indeed perhaps the improvements that need to happen as well because of COVID. We've got Brexit on the horizon as well, or we've got Brexit now, which is kind of on the back burner in terms of the impacts. What is your view about having this plan maybe become a 3-year strategy, and what would be the, where does your relationship perhaps with Wales Audit, and the fact that there are 4 authorities here that you're providing this service to, where I'm sure you're looking to provide consistency and I suppose get the benefits out of the fact that there are 4 councils involved here now.
Yeah.
Any views about that? That's a bit of a rambling question, but hopefully you've got my drift.
Okay, I'll do my best and certainly come back to me if I don't cover all the points. In relation to relationship with Audit Wales, obviously there are performance auditors and financial auditors for each of the 4 authorities, all provided through Audit Wales. There is some overlap in relation to the performance audit staff, so I meet quite often with Sarah Jane Byrne, for example, because Sarah covers the performance aspects across all 4 of the authorities that I cover as well. In relation to the financial audit, there are different auditors for each of the 4 councils, but again we have regular catch-ups with my colleagues to identify and discuss any issues that may have arisen or may be arising, so that works quite well. So I think that that's a perfectly sound relationship in relation to the auditors in all 4 authorities there. In relation to a longer term plan, internal audit planning has gone through different sort of approaches over the years, and exactly what you set out there in terms of having a longer term strategic plan, that's something that was sort of done a few years ago in terms of having 5-year or 3-year cycles of things. That's generally changed over more recent times to be a more dynamic approach and sort of responding to risks and how things are developing over time. And I suppose if we wanted a classic example of how you have to respond to changing circumstances, I suppose last year is a prime example. So that's not to say that we need to have a longer term view of when we look at different issues over time. But what, as I said earlier, what we have to do really these days is respond to things more dynamically as they change over time. So I'm not sure. Does that answer your question, Mrs. Williams?
Yeah, that's an interesting point about being more dynamic, but at the same time, that applies to all of the council's strategies, doesn't it, and plans. So my own view would be that it is still very indeed wise to have a longer term strategy, and but one that is, of course, allows you the flexibility to be there, have a dynamic approach as well. It's about getting a balance, I guess, between those two things.
Yeah, perhaps I should add as well, and you mentioned there about the benefits of having a regional service. We have identified some common areas for us to look at again in the plans. So one of them is around cybersecurity, which Mark Shepherd, as the chief exec, sort of mentioned in terms of people working at home and councils all organisations being more susceptible to potential fraud and so on linked to use of IT. That's something that we're looking at across all 4, and there are some other areas that we intend looking at as well that have been identified as common issues across 4. And one of the benefits is, as I touched on, really purchasing the software to support the internal audit service. We've taken the opportunity to have standard reports, standard working practices and standard approaches, so that there are economies of scale from doing that. And similarly, the annual reports, the one I've just gone through, and the plan, they are far more standard. Whilst we tailor them to individual circumstances, they are more of a standard approach across all 4 councils now as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Food for thought. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see anybody else with a hand up, Mark, but I have a couple of questions, or a question really. It's a comprehensive plan, and thank you for sharing that with us. You did mention in your earlier presentation about still having a number of vacancies, and the need to get the team fully resourced, and then obviously getting them up to speed with how each council works. So are you, and in addition, you're going through a tender process with the external internal audit teams that we've been using, so SWAT. So are you hoping to front load a number of the audits by using external suppliers, so that we are front loaded, so that we then have time to train new auditors as they come on and embed them with us? Or are you aiming to backload the audits at the end of the year after you have hopefully recruited? What's the plan as to how you're going to be tackling it?
What you rightly said at the start is correct there, in terms of we have still got some vacancies, and finalising the restructure and going through that process will address that. And yes, we have been using Southwest Audit Partnership to supplement our workforce for some audits, and that will probably continue. Well, them or an alternative will likely to be used for the foreseeable future to a limited extent. In terms of the plan, we've basically developed the plan based on the resources that we've got and the resources that we are likely to be able to buy in, and making an assumption on when posts will be filled, but there's sufficient flexibility in the plan for us to be able to deliver the work that we've identified. So yeah, so we're not sort of front loading or sort of back loading, or we'd be trying, because there's also an issue about sort of capacity within the authority to be able to, you know, deal with auditors, whether they're internal or external, as well as was mentioned earlier on. So we are conscious of that as well. So we'll try and, you know, even out the workload during the year, taking account of the resources both at the council and within the service at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Williams, you've got your hand up. I didn't know whether that's a legacy hand or whether you've got another question. Oh, right. OK, then. So, well, there aren't any other hands up for questions. So, Mark, thank you very much again for that presentation. So can I ask the committee to have for a mover and seconder to say that we've considered and approved the draft internal audit strategy and plan, please?
I can move that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. And then we move on to our final agenda item, which is the forward work plan. And Jill, I think you're going to take us through that. Thank you.
I will, Chair, because as you know, Debbie's had to go and attend the 151s for me. So, so this is fairly self-explanatory. It's the forward work programme for the committee. You'll see at paragraph 4.2 the proposed agenda items for July. I'm not sure yet whether there are any others that anybody on the committee will have noted need to be added. So open it up for comments at the end. And also, Chair, just to say that at the moment there isn't another audit committee planned until November, and I think that given the volume and content that we're taking at the Governance and Audit Committee, it may be appropriate to have an additional meeting in September. So I'll invite comments on both the forward work programme and an additional meeting in the diary.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jill. I totally agree that I think we are going to need another meeting in September. Purely, I mean, we've got to include the complaints and whether it's advice on the current complaints process, so we can actually understand that, and then how we can be reviewing complaints. But I think that I personally think that we do need to have a meeting in September. And I would ask if we can get that in, if one of the things is an understanding on how complaints are managed within the authority, so that we can then decide how we're going to review the process. So has anybody else got any other questions or suggestions for Jill on the forward work plan, please? Are you all in agreement with a further meeting in September and with some training for the committee or presentation for the committee on complaints? And there may be some further information on the local government and elections bill as well. Bridie.
Yes, please.
Sorry, Bridie, we can't hear you. I don't know whether you can speak closer to the microphone.
Right, is it better now?
A little bit.
I'll try and talk as closely as I can tonight. I'm on my phone, I'm having IT issues, so it's been on my phone this meeting. Okay. I was going to ask about the timing of these meetings. I'm very happy to have another meeting in September. I think waiting until November has been a very long way off. And I was just wondering, because this is the first time we've had a Friday meeting, I think. They're in the week. I was just wondering, are we now, given I've not checked to see what day of the week the November meeting is, so I'm just wondering, are we now moved to
Friday afternoon permanently or not?
No, the only reason we met this Friday was because the finance asked for the meeting to be delayed. There was a development control meeting on Thursday, and that would have clashed with the time that we would normally be meeting. And so the request was made for us to meet as a one-off on the Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. So that was agreed with the committee. I think it was at the last meeting that it would be at 2 o'clock on Friday rather than Friday morning, because 2 o'clock was a better time and it's in line with the time we would normally meet as a committee.
That's fine. I think actually the last time we had audit, I was actually giving birth. So that's probably why I can't remember that last meeting.
I think that was a very good excuse for you not to be there, and I'm glad you didn't dial in for the meeting, to be quite honest, Bridie, in that state personally. But sorry, that may not be an appropriate comment. I do apologise.
No, I think I wouldn't have wanted to dial in at that point either.
No. So yes, it would, but of course, because it's going to be a later meeting, it will be for the officers to work out when it can be fitted in. But I think that Thursdays have generally been the standard time for our meetings. Mrs. Williams.
Apologies, Chair. Perhaps I'm misreading this. We have a meeting in July, don't we? 22nd of July?
Yes, but then there's a big gap between 2nd of July through to the 11th of November, and that's what we're concerned about.
Yes, and so at the meeting in July, I'm just trying to check, to look to see, when are we approving the audited accounts then?
That's in July. So the audited accounts will be approved in July.
I can see it, yeah, thank you. That's fine.
Okay.
I'm happy for September meeting as well, that's fine.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, Mrs. Williams, your hand's up. I didn't know if you wanted to come back again.
No, sorry about that. I just
That's all right. That's okay.
I can't quickly enough
for you.
That's the problem.
That's okay. So on that basis, then, so we're going to get work for a meeting in September, and as well as obviously our July meeting. And so if I could ask for a proposer and seconder, please, to consider that we have considered and approved the forward work programme for the Governance and Audit Committee.
Move.
Second.
Thank you very much. So can I thank all officers, all colleagues from Audit Wales, all councillors for being here on a warm and muggy Friday afternoon. Thank you everybody for your involvement. It's 4:23, so I'll declare the meeting closed and wish you all a very happy weekend. I hope you all manage to get some R&R and recharge the batteries. So thank